Imagine waking up to find your city swallowed by a thick yellow fog. You step outside and the air burns your throat. A deep, hacking cough rips through your lungs. By nightfall, the first victims collapse in the streets. It's December 1952, and London, England settles into winter. A city once alive with bustling markets and smoky pubs slowly disappears overnight. First the landmarks, then the streets, then the people. A thick yellow-brown fog rolls in, so dense you can't see your hand in front of your face. It creeps into homes, clogs the streets, and turns London into a silent ghost town. Within days, thousands are dead. This wasn't just bad weather, it was the Great Smog of London, one of the deadliest man-made environmental disasters in history. A lethal cocktail of pollution, government negligence, and the perfect storm of weather conditions created a disaster no one saw coming. For 5 days, London became a gas chamber with no way out. To understand what happened, we have to go back a bit. This was post-war London. The city was rebuilding and the economy was struggling. London's atmosphere on the best days was thick with soot as factories and power stations belched thick black smoke. Cars and buses added to the already grimy air, and homes stoked their fireplaces with coal. To save money, the government exported high-quality coal overseas, leaving Londoners with nutty slack, a cheap, sulfur-laden alternative. Nutty slack burned dirtier, releasing thick, choking smoke that clung to the city. In December, as temperatures dropped, thousands of fireplaces roared to life. As people shoveled coal into their fireplaces, each scoop unknowingly fueled their own disaster. Under normal conditions, the city's smog would rise and drift away. But on December 4th, the air locked itself in place with a temperature inversion. This happens when a layer of warm air sits on top of a colder layer, acting like a lid, preventing air from rising. Instead of dispersing, pollutants were trapped at street level, forming a dense, poisonous cloud with nowhere to go. By the next morning, the fog had thickened into a wall of yellow-gray smog, rolling through the streets like a slow-moving tide. It swallowed buildings, dimmed streetlights, and blurred the line between night and day. At first, people weren't too alarmed. After all, London was famous for its pea soupers, a nickname for the thick yellow-green fog that regularly blanketed the city. It was just another part of life. But as the hours passed, something felt off. The air was heavier, thicker. The usual damp chill now carried a sharp chemical sting. The poison crept into homes, seeping under doors, curling through keyholes, filling room after room until it was deep in the lungs of the city's residents. The coughing started early, dry at first, then turned into deep, hacking fits. By the second day, it felt like breathing fire. For those with asthma, it was a death sentence. The air was saturated with sulfur dioxide, which turned into sulfuric acid as it hit the lungs. It didn't matter if you were strong or weak, no one could escape the poison. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and doctors saw something terrifying. People weren't just getting sick, they were dying. The elderly and infants were the first to go, but then otherwise healthy adults started to collapse as well. The fog wasn't just irritating, it was suffocating people in their own homes. And it wasn't just humans, animals were dying too. Cattle suffocated as the thick air coated their lungs. Birds dropped from the sky. The entire city was slowly being choked to death, and there was nowhere to hide. As the days dragged on, the city grew more desperate. Makeshift gas masks made of cloth soaked in water or vinegar became the only defense against the toxic air. People wandered in a blind panic, hands over their faces, gasping for air, but there was no escape. A man fell to his knees, clutching his chest. A woman screamed for help, but her voice was swallowed by the fog, all while the poison thickened. A few city workers received industrial-grade Martindale respirators, but most Londoners were left defenseless. Public transport ground to a halt. Ambulances stopped running, leaving the injured without help. Cars piled up in accidents as drivers couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Pedestrians who ventured outside often got lost, all while criminals took advantage of the chaos. Muggings and robberies skyrocketed. Sports games were rescheduled, and even indoor concerts and films were canceled because patrons couldn't see the screen from their seat. The government dismissed it as just another fog. There was no warnings, no evacuation orders. The city was left to suffocate. After 5 long days, a shift in the weather finally brought relief. Winds picked up, breaking the deadly inversion, and the smog began to lift. But as the skies cleared, the true scale of the disaster became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just another London fog, it was a massacre. One family assumed their elderly father was simply avoiding the cold, staying inside as usual. But when they were able to check on him, they found him slumped in his chair, the fog still clinging to his lungs. He had suffocated alone. Across the city, similar scenes unfolded, entire families shattered, unable to say goodbye. Morgues overflowed, and the city fell into mourning. At first, the official death toll was estimated at 4,000, with over 100,000 people suffering long-term respiratory illnesses. But E.T. Wilkins, the UK's top pollution expert at the time, later found that an additional 8,000 people had died in the following months, bringing the total to 12,000 deaths. Public outrage forced the government to act. The disaster exposed a grim truth. London's air pollution wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a killer. In 1956, the Clean Air Act was passed, marking a turning point in environmental legislation. New laws regulated pollution, pushed for cleaner fuels, and restricted the use of coal fires in homes, slowly transforming London's air quality. It took a catastrophe to force change, but for many families, those changes came too late. This tragedy remains one of the deadliest environmental disasters in history. The Great Smog of London crept through the walls, but what happens when the walls themselves become the death trap? Just 50 years earlier, hundreds found themselves locked in a burning theater with no escape. Click here to watch the chilling story of the Iroquois Theater fire. History is full of forgotten disasters like this one. Has there been a historical event in your town you think deserves to be unpacked? Tell me about it in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Past Unpacked.